Hello again. So I play in the house band in a local jazz jam night, and a little while ago we started having some teenagers turn up regularly to the jam night, which was really great to see. And it made me think back to when I was first discovering jazz piano around about 17 or 18 years old. Now, there wasn't a local jazz jam then. YouTube didn't exist. And I didn't know anybody in the local area who was a jazz piano player. And at that point in my learning, I really could have done with someone who was a little bit further down the road than me, just giving me a few pointers. So for what it's worth, here's 5 things that I think I could have done with someone telling me when I was first starting out, and would have saved me a bunch of time in my development on my jazz piano journey. And hopefully some of these will be useful for some of you too. Stock left-hand voicings. Now, probably like a lot of people, before I started getting into jazz, I was already playing a lot of chord-based piano music, where I was playing pretty much triads in my right hand with octaves of the root note in my left hand. Okay, now for someone wanting to get into jazz, I wouldn't be necessarily surprised to see them just apply that same thing to jazz. But there are conventions and stock approaches that we should be learning if we really want to get that authentic jazz sound into our playing. First of all, if we're playing with a band, then our bass player is taking care of the bass notes. And due to the nature of most jazz, those bass lines are quite busy. They move around a lot. Okay, so unless you're playing something in unison with them, then you playing your octaves down here is going to interfere with what the bass player is doing. So instead of playing bass notes in your left hand and chords in your right hand, when you're playing jazz, when there's a bass player present, nearly all the time you should be playing chords and voicings in your left hand in this central area, this middle area of the piano. Now, hopefully this is something that you've already started exploring if you've already started playing jazz piano. Now, how should we be playing these left-hand chords? Well, when I started playing jazz, all I was doing was playing the chords exactly as they were written on the lead sheet. And on the lead sheet, nearly all our chord symbols were written just as playing 7th chords. So major 7th, minor 7th, dominant 7. And I was just playing the chord tones, the root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. So C minor 7, I would just play the root, 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. But it wasn't bringing out the colour and the flavour that I was hearing in more experienced players. They were playing from the same lead sheets, the same chord symbols, but their chords sounded richer than my plain 7th chords. A big part of the character of jazz is the rich and sometimes complex harmony, but if you were to look at a standard jazz lead sheet, you'd see that most of the chords on there are just simple 7th chords, not necessarily full of that rich harmony. Now, something that I had to learn as a jazz piano player is that chord symbols give us information and not instructions. They guide us on the functionality of the harmony, but as a jazz musician, I get to choose the density of that chord. And there's the expectation with most types of jazz that we're going to add extra extensions to those chord tones, to our root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. So when I see a minor 7 chord on a lead sheet, I'm most typically going to play a minor 9 or a minor 11. But I don't need for my chord symbol to say minor 9 for me to play a minor 9. Okay? Anyway, the purpose of this point is to say that there are a handful of standard stock left-hand voicings, mostly rootless, for all our chord types that people have been using for forever, and that you should make a priority to be learning and playing when you're starting out in jazz piano. I have very kindly made for you a PDF sheet of all these voicing formulas so that you can download this and learn and work out all of your voicings for all of your chords. Link is in the description. So take these formulas and apply them to all of your chords. Great way to do this is through your repertoire. So tunes that maybe you're already playing and that you already know, make sure that you can play them through with these specific voicings. Can you play through the whole tune just using these correct stock voicings? So when we have these formulas and we've got these voicings locked down, we've got the keys to the castle. What I mean by that is that inside these voicings, we've got these extra extensions that bring in that extra colour that we were looking for. So for example, my G7 voicing, that's my G7 voicing, it doesn't have a root note, it hasn't got the 5th in there. You know, what we've done is we've dropped the root and the 5th in place of the 9th and the 13th. So we've got the 3rd, 7th, 9th, and 13th. So I've got that extra colour, and without compromising the harmonic integrity of that chord, I've just added some extra colour. Also, with these voicings, we're always trying to fit them within this area of the piano. Okay, and we always want to have either the 3rd or the 7th at the bottom of our voicing. And that inadvertently means that we tend to have only one or two places that we're ever going to play any of our chords. So for me, G minor 7, this is the only place I play my G minor 7 voicing. This is the only place I play my A flat 7 voicing. Okay, so I'm not taking up brain space thinking about where I'm going to play my left-hand voicings when I'm trying to solo, because there's only one or maybe two places with some. That's my C minor 7 voicing. That's also my C minor 7 voicing, because one's got the third at the bottom, one's got the seventh at the bottom, and both of them fit within this space. So for some chords we have maybe two voicings, but some chords like my G minor 7, I've only got that one voicing. So we're not taking up that space, brain space, when we're trying to think about other things with where we're going to play our left-hand voicings. We've got them locked down and they don't change. Don't forget to grab that PDF. Lesson number 2, forget about scales. For now. Now, before I get into this, I just want to say that scales are valuable. They're important to know well and to use. I use them all the time. But I just don't think that they are the best starting point for learning to improvise. Hear me out. A really common route into improvisation, and something that gets talked a lot about in jazz education, is chord-scale relationship. This concept that different chord types give us different scale options to play with when we're improvising. Now, for a while at the beginning of my jazz journey, too long really, this was pretty much all that I was doing when I was soloing. I was just meandering through scales. Now, for one, it didn't sound much like language, but we're going to come onto that a bit later on in this video. But also, there's a couple of other problems associated with this approach. Firstly, when we think about there being an overarching scale that we can use over a chord, it kind of suggests that all of the notes of that scale are equal, when that's not really the case. So if we take the ever-present 2-5-1, now major 2-5-1, a typical approach to this would be to play over the 2 chord, play the Dorian scale or the Dorian mode, over the 5 chord to play Mixolydian, over the 1 chord to play the Ionian mode. Now, if you know your modes, you'll know that those 3 scales are all the same major scale. So in the key of F, a 2-5-1, G minor 7, C7, F major 7, G Dorian, C Mixolydian, F Ionian. All of those are just the one same set of notes, an F major scale. So this approach sort of suggests that we can use all of these notes and we're good to go. But if that's the case, how come on my G minor, that E doesn't sound good? And on my F major 7, that B flat doesn't sound good. Okay, if we saw our G Dorian, or our F major scale, there's an E natural in there, but on that G minor, that E natural doesn't sound good. But when we go to our next chord, C7, that E suddenly starts to sound good again. And on our G minor and our C7, our B flat sounds lovely. But when we play it over our F major 7, it doesn't sound good. So just thinking about scales and modes over chords can lull us into this false sense of security of thinking that all our scale tones are equal, when in reality, our chord tones, our root, third, and fifth and seventh of each chord, are our strong, stable notes. For G minor 7, root, third, fifth, and seventh are all going to be strong, stable tones over our chord. And our other scale degrees are all going to be unstable and tension notes, some more tense than others. So my point is, when you're starting to solo, focus on your chord tones and use your scale tones to connect them. Okay, so chord tones, I know that they're going to be stable. And then connect. So I can use those notes. I could use that B flat over an F, but I'm using it to connect to a chord tone. Okay? Secondly, the other thing that isn't helpful about just using scales for improvising is that it leaves no room for chromaticism. At least it doesn't if all you're using is scales. Chromaticism is such an integral part of the jazz sound, and if we're just using scales to solo, then we're missing out on all the good stuff that's baked into chromaticism. Whether it's chromatic lines down to a chord tone, or whether it's something like an enclosure, or just simple approach notes to chord tones. Yeah. Okay, if we're just using scales, then we're missing out on all the good stuff that's packed into chromaticism. So my point 2 being, don't make scales your focus. Make sure you are just as comfortable, if not more comfortable, making chord tones your focus and introducing chromaticism in between. And just to reiterate, I'm not saying that scales and modes are bad and don't use them. What I'm saying is that when you're first starting out with soloing, I think you'll build a sturdier foundation with more components of language if you start with chord tones and chromaticism. That's just my take. If you're in the early stages of your jazz piano journey, which I assume that most people watching this video are, without a good teacher, it's usually really difficult to know what your learning focus should be, what your priorities should be. Because there are some fundamental elements of jazz piano that you should be taking care of to make sure you've got that strong foundation and to accelerate your growth. So I guess a bonus tip would be to find a teacher who can make sure that you're learning what you need to learn and walk you through step by step. Now, I've just created a video course that takes you through step by step the fundamental components of playing jazz piano with other people. We use 2 jazz standards to learn and understand left-hand voicings, to learn and understand our two-handed comping, and a number of different ways to develop strong and stylistic soloing. So maybe if you're not in a position to get yourself weekly piano lessons with a local jazz teacher, then a course like mine might be just what you need. There's a link to the course up here and down there if you think it might be a good fit for where you're at. Okay, point number 3. Dominant chord extensions. One of the great things about playing jazz is that the chords of the tunes that we're playing are open to interpretation and exploration, and dominant chords is where we can have the most fun. As I've touched on already, when I first started exploring jazz, I assumed that all the chords should be played exactly as they were written on the lead sheet, but that's not the case. And when it comes to dominant chords, we have so much liberty with what notes that we can add to our chord that are going to make it sound interesting. You see a 7 chord, why not add a flat 9 or a 13? Or a sharp 9 and a flat 13, or a sharp 11. The functionality of a dominant chord is typically to push us somewhere, and that happens because of the instability of the chord, which is caused by the tension in the chord. Now, when we add all these extra extensions on there, all we're doing is increasing that instability and that tension, and we don't compromise the functionality of the chord. Also, if you have a dominant chord that lasts, say, a whole bar, why not give us a few variations on that and build that tension? If we have something like this, then I go. I've gone 13, flat 9, sharp 9, flat 13, flat 9, 13, and then resolve. So even though it may be on my lead sheet, it just says C, A7, D minor 7, G7, C. I've got that option of really hamming up that dominant chord. Here are the most common dominant left-hand voicings that I use. First is just the 13, so G13, and then I've got the 7 flat 9, and I've got the flat 9 flat 13, and I've got sharp 9 flat 13. They're probably the most common ones that I use. And those last 3, our flat 9, our flat 9, flat 13, sharp 9, any of those could be used when you see an altered chord on a lead sheet, or any type of altered chord. So if you see a G7 flat 9, or you see a G7 sharp 5, or a G7 flat 9 flat 13, or you see a G7 altered, any of those that I used there could be used in that place. You know, that chord symbol is telling you that this dominant chord wants to have some sort of alterations to it, but it doesn't necessarily need to be specifically what's written there. All of those versions with that flat 9, all of those are going to bring you that character and the functionality of what you're looking for. That's going to lead you probably to a C minor 7 or a C minor 6. What makes jazz jazz is that each musician is interpreting the harmonic framework of the song in their own way. That's why Herbie Hancock Keith Jarrett, McCoy Tyner, Oscar Peterson, they all sound different. They've all got their own sounds. They can all play the same song, but they would play it differently because each of them is taking that foundational harmonic framework and they're using their own preferences to shape it. So point number 3 is to explore your different approaches for dominant chords. Point number 4. Now, you've probably heard people say something along the lines of, it's not what you play, it's how you play it. And it's no secret that you can play all the right notes without it sounding good, and you can equally play all the wrong notes, but if your rhythm and your phrasing are on point and you resolve it nicely, then the wrong notes can sound good. Okay, now I think that it's this stuff, your phrasing, your rhythm, your dynamics, this is the stuff that can separate a good player from a beginner or even an intermediate. I'd much rather listen to someone play just a few notes but with great feel than to hear someone play a lot of notes with no feel whatsoever. I reckon if you thought about your favourite solos or your favourite improvisers, what you love about them probably isn't their note choices, it's more these other elements. It's their rhythm, it's their phrasing, it's their dynamics. So start paying close attention to your time and your feel. Now that could be working on scales and exercises along with the metronome, making sure that you can be clinical when you do want to do some runs when you're playing, that you know that your lines are going to hit exactly where you want them to be on that grid. An important point in playing jazz is paying attention to how you articulate your swung quavers. It's not the downbeat that we accentuate the swung quaver, that offbeat. When we're improvising with swung quavers, we want to be making sure that our lines it's our swung quavers. It's those offbeats that need to be accentuated. If we haven't noticed that already, that's something important that we're missing out on. Okay, so paying attention to how you swing your quavers is an important lesson to how you phrase your lines in jazz. So to start with, maybe focus on playing less, but with more engaging phrasing. So maybe less complexity in the note choices, but more interesting rhythms and phrases. And make sure that you're phrasing your swung quavers correctly. Okay, last point, language. I've spoken already about scales not being my recommended starting point for learning how to improvise. And this last point, language, is connected to that. You see, you can play all the right scales, you can play all the right chord tones over your jazz standards and still not sound like the jazz players that you want to sound like. Now, for a long time, I felt super comfortable navigating my scales and my chord tones over all my chords and my jazz standards, but still felt like there was a lack of language in my playing. And by language, I mean lines and phrases that sort of jump out to your ear as sounding jazz, if you know what I mean. Now, it wasn't until I started stealing these little components of language that I started to hear what I wanted to hear in my own playing. Lots of people talk about the value of transcribing solos, but what I do more of is transcribing just little phrases. So not whole solos, just like 1 or 2 bars. So if I'm listening to something and there's a little line that jumps out to me as, oh, that's a really nice little jazzy phrase, I'll transcribe just that phrase and then I'll understand what's going on, take it around the circle of fifths, look for where and when I can use it, over which chords, whereabouts in the bar it should fall, and then I'll look for ways to intentionally integrate that into my soloing. So this could be something as simple as a triplet arpeggio. Okay, 1. Something you hear all the time in jazz, everyone plays it, and it sounds like jazz. If I'm soloing, okay, sounds really nice, sounds like jazz. It's just that one little component. We can use it all over the place. We can use it on any different chord. It's really useful. In fact, there's just something that I stole from Bill Evans, which he plays on his album. It's the middle of some solo in his album From Left to Right, where he goes. Okay, and the first part of that is just that triplet arpeggio I just played. Approach note to the 3rd, up to the 9th, and then he just comes down. And then down from the 7th to the root. Okay, so I heard that phrase on an album and was like, I like that sound, I'm going to copy that, work out what it is. He plays it over a major 7. But I could play that over a minor 7. I could play that over a dominant 7. Okay, so understanding what I can do with that and then being able to use it on different places and then start intentionally looking for ways to incorporate it into my own soloing. Obviously, it's not something I use all the time, but having something there that's going to just inject a bit of language into my playing is so useful to have. So here's a few of the little bits of language that I've stolen over time. So there's a little line over a 5/1, or a 2/5, or another little cadence sort of idea. Because there are little bits of language that I've stolen from other people that I've got really comfortable in my fingers in a whole bunch of keys that I can now employ when I want, when I'm playing. So if I was to take us through a 1-6-2-5 and try and have a go at employing those things. So if I can connect those things nicely in along with my scales and my chord tones and my chromaticism, then my solos start to resemble something that sounds a little bit like language. So the moral of the story, look for little phrases of language that you can take and learn and integrate them into your solos to bring some language into your playing. Magic. So there you go. I hope some of the points in this video have been useful for you. If there's a jazz jam near you, then I'd encourage you to go and get involved. It's a great way to try out the stuff that you've been working on in your own practice. It's also great to play with other musicians. It's a great way to network with other like-minded people, and you might even get some gigs out of it. So I hope some of this stuff's been helpful. Thanks for being here.